Thanks, you guys. That's a lot brighter than I thought it was going to be. This is going to be a fun little talk. Sorry, the only thing I guess keeping you from the end of the conference is Johnny and I, so we'll be fairly quick here. One of the things that I never thought would happen, neither did my parents, is that I would ever be on an NBA stage. This is my first and last time probably, but it's not. It's for being nerdy rather than being, coordinated. All right, we're going to go through just a few things about authenticity. Johnny and I are both really passionate about this. With the idea here is assume that people were super authentic in these situations. Assume you're going to work for a company and they just told you what it was really like. And you're interviewing and you just tell them what you're really like. And you can decide whether that was a good match or not. Wouldn't that be great? Unfortunately, what happens, and you've probably all seen this play out if you've anyone done the dating scene? Yes, you go on the date and no one really shows their true colors, but they're thinking a lot of things that they don't say, and then you get married. I'm on my second run of that, and the second one is fantastic. The first one, I don't think we were very honest with each other about what we were expecting. Now, the interesting thing is usually there's a good fit somewhere if you can just be really authentic about that. So that's what we're going to try to foster a little bit here. If this is going to go here. All right, so here's pattern. Mel and I started this in 2013. So we're almost 10 years now. We have, actually that's a little bit outdated. We have 1,300 employees. We'll do $1 billion in revenue this year. We have 22 locations across the globe. It's been a really fun ride. And we've built it largely. My background is 17 years, all in data science, data management, and have been super nerdy, I guess. And we've just built some really cool machine learning and AI to help brands sell more on the digital platforms. And it has worked. All right, there's me in my church suit. I used to work for the church. I did 11 years there, and it was a pretty good place. I'm no longer affiliated with the church, but great place to work. And I learned some things. One of the things, I was managing all the church's back-end data, and I wanted a promotion. They had this portfolio director job that I asked for many years, and it was customer facing. And they're like, Dave, you need to work on your executive presence. And so I tried. I got some books. I tried to figure out how to be a good executive presence guy, but it never really worked. And after 11 years, and I still did not get that job, I just thought maybe I'm just terrible at that executive presence thing. And one thing I realized is that it made me a little worse at my job because I was always trying to I would start emulating people that had what they told me was good executive presence. And I found that I was never as good as them at being them. And so at a certain point, largely when we started the company, I was like, I guess I'm just going to try to be myself. And hopefully that works out. And it has. And then it wasn't too far into pattern. One of the great advertising directors we have at Pattern puts out this little thing on LinkedIn, and she says, hey, I'm working on executive presence. And she was working for Pattern. So of course I'm like, hey, I want, schedule a meeting, half hour with us. Let's get together. Let's talk about this executive presence thing. So I call her in my office, and I'm like, hey, what's making you care about executive presence at Pattern? She's like, well, I got some feedback that some people think I'm a bit too aggressive. I was like, okay, so do some people like that you're aggressive? She's like, yeah, some people like it. And she's like, and I'm like, and some people don't like it. She's like, yeah, and some people don't like it. It's like, well, so then what are you going to do? And she's, wondering what I'm going to go with this conversation. And I was like, I have an idea. How about you just be yourself? She's like, oh okay. And then, of course, I'm getting off the elevator, and we always do these pattern master classes. And there was this one about, how to dress, to professionally and all this stuff. And so, of course, I'm like, hey, let's, I don't like any of that kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, because I'm convinced, it isn't just, I'm convinced that people, you will never be, as you try to emulate other people, you can never be better than them. Like, we have a sales guy at Pattern that I used to follow around because he's amazing. He worked at Oracle for like 20 years, had massive success. And he would go in and people would just be, mesmerized a little bit by him, and he'd build trust really quick. And in the beginning, I tried to emulate his sales technique. And then over time, I was like, well, I'm just going to do I'm just going to tell him about the machine learning and do the thing. And that seemed to work too. And I would have never been as good as Steve is at being Steve. I just found my place just trying to be myself. And I'm convinced that if we can start doing that more, not only in companies, but just in your own life, you'll be much better rather than trying to always figure out how to be somebody else or try to be a different version. And I think the reason a lot of this is, the reason why authenticity works. Pattern is interesting. We have a 4.8 glass door, which I didn't even really know what that was until I started the company. And we don't ever try to make it look better or worse or anything else. But 4.8 is really good. And I'm asking myself, I wonder why it's so good. And I think it's simply because we're trying to set expectations in the beginning. So like if you were to come to Pattern, there's some great things. It's a pretty nerdy, quirky group of people. So if you like that, you'll fit right in. Very data-centric. It's one of our core values. If you like that, you fit right in. We pay people more than most everywhere else. We mainly read that out of I read that out of several books. And so we beat the market on pay, but our insurance is good, but costs more. We've benchmarked it across the other organizations, and we're not as good. We're not covering insurance as well as everybody else. And we're always out of Coke Zero. I don't know why, but it seems to run out every 3 days. And our snacks, for like the first 5 years, people were like, hey, could you guys offer some free snacks? So we did free snacks. And our free snacks, I would give them a solid mid. They're not like really good, but they're okay. So that's sort of, if you're like, hey, that sounds like a good fit for me, very nerdy, good comp and all, and a fun group to be with. If you like that crowd, then you would want to come work for us. And if not, then Pattern is not the best place. But I think this is why we have such a good review on Glassdoor, because the people who come, they're like, I fit right in here. And a lack of authenticity overall doesn't work in the long run, right? This is a little example of like, I don't know, these influencer types. This is like a private jet, but as you can see, it's like in a mall. So they do these TikTok, and they pay to have these things like we're on this private jet, but they're really not on the private jet. It's weird. And here's some things where, companies that are not authentic, or people, this is sideways. Okay, here's this target line over here, this study, this Solomon study. That target line, is it, okay, raise your hand if you think it's matches with A, B, or C. We're gonna start with A here, all right? If you think it matches with A, raise your hand. If you think it matches with B, raise your hand. If you think it matches with C, raise your hand. All right, good. You guys can all work a pattern. So if you do this without social influence, 99% of the people get that right, just like we did today. Here's the weird thing, is if you ask this multiple times and they have different lines, whatever, 75% of people, because they stage it, right? They bring it in and they have a group of people that are all going to say the wrong answer to try to get the one guy who doesn't know what's going on to see if he's going to stick to what he knows is the right answer. He's just going to say, oh, I guess what they said, right? So they bring it in. 75% of the time, people conform with the group. And they do this multiple times. 32% of the people conform every single time they're tested. So if you're in a meeting, your next meeting, and somebody says, hey, this is a good idea, if everyone starts shaking their head, you might be that 32%. A third of the room is just like, I'm just going to go along with whatever, even though I know this is a terrible idea. So this is where companies that, as you can foster that full authenticity, they just make better decisions. It's amazing how sideways you go on the follower mentality. This is, this guy, Kabi Lame, I think is, the #1 TikToker. He has the most followers as of September, TikTok. And this guy's pretty funny because he's like, all these people come up with these ingenious ideas, like she's come up with this, hey, you just can make a tissue holder out of the toilet paper. And then he's like, so can I. You just tear it. That's it. There you go. And people love it. It's just being very, very authentic. Now, here's where authenticity goes sideways, and it just drives me crazy, is there's this idea of brutal honesty. So when you get it too far in your head that what you stake your thing on is you're really authentic, then in many cases, you end up being, you have this badge of honor, like I'm brutally honest, and I just tell you exactly what I think all the time, right? And then you're sort of an asshole. And then no one wants to work with you because you're a jerk. But there is another way, right? Can't we just be really authentic about things and then not be an asshole like this guy? He's just like, you could do that. This is fun. This is the Fosbury flop, Dick Fosbury, 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Everyone used to high jump like you see on the left. That was the scissor, and they had a bunch of styles. And then this crazy guy starts doing this. He was an engineer, and he's like, my center of gravity would be better if I went over backwards. And everyone just thought he was nuts until he won the Olympics. There's just lots of stories where people go against the grain. This guy, this is a fun story. He was a farmer, and and he's 61 on this race, 61. And they're racing from, it's 600-mile race in Australia. And it ended in Sydney. I think it went from Melbourne to Sydney. And he had never done any racing at all. He has like these galoshes, like these boots that he usually runs in on the farm. And they ask him like, hey, he's like, I always want to do a race. He's like 61, and there's all these, guys who read Runner's World, and they got all these trainers and all this stuff. And he just shows up there, and the rule was that because it takes 5 days or 7 days or something like that, that you would run for 18, sleep for 6, run for 18. And he's like, oh, I've done 24 hours all the time just on the farm, and I just chase the cows around. I don't have a car. I just, run around all the time. And so then he had this little jog that was like this, and he beat the record all time by 2 days. 2 days. No one was even close. And they're asking him, they're like, hey, would you do it again? He's like, oh, no. No, I wouldn't do it again. But just, very authentic guy. And he comes from he just stepped out of like the follower group and stepped into a place where he's like, hey, I think this just works. Some of the great, innovations come in that way. Okay, there's a lot of things, I won't talk about a lot of these, but there's a lot of things that don't make sense that companies do all the time. Performance reviews. You know how there's like the central HR group, and they're like, here's all the performance reviews, and you fill out the sheet, and then companies will have like cultural values, and then you're like, rate the employee on the cultural values. We have them too, we have cultural values. You're like, okay, team of doers, 1 through 5, and everyone has to submit all of their stuff back up to central HR, and then all of those things get filed into somewhere where no one ever even knows where that happened. And good managers are having these talks with their employees all the time anyway. So it's a low trust environment where you're like, we need you to turn in the paper to make sure you did it, right? It's sort of just but for whatever reason, everyone does it except for us. So if you don't want to do this anymore, come to pattern. But the other thing that drives me crazy is like these employee levels, there's like, and everyone makes up a number. They're like, we're gonna have levels of employees of like 23, 24, 25, 26. Why is it that? I don't know. We just make it up. And then like Amazon does 2 through 11 and they skip 9, I think. And no one knows why they skip 9. But in order to get promoted at Amazon, you have to have 2 people above you rate you, and you have to then you got to build a 6-page document. And most often whoever the boss is normally should know if they should get a promotion because they're managing them every day. But they make it this whole charade, and then tons of people quit because they don't get promoted, even though they're getting paid good and everything. So there's some weird things. Fair pay is also another one where Google, I think, did the right thing on this, where they basically said, hey, there are people who are really good and they're always underpaid. Pattern, we're convinced, that because the elite performers in an organization, what normally happens is they're like, hey, we'll give you 10% more because we want it to be fair for everyone, right? But the top, whatever percent, I don't even know what it is, I don't care, it depends on the company, is carrying the company. And everyone knows this, right? And so if they're doing that, generally we're all afraid to pay them too much because then it's like won't be totally fair anymore. We sort of go against that, and we're just like, hey, if you deserve more pay, then we just pay you more. And we always pay that end a lot more just because it makes sense. Now, sometimes you start thinking that with authenticity, it means you can't improve. Sometimes you're like, hey, this is just how I am. And I think that's absolutely the wrong way to think about it, because if I think about myself, even over the last 5, 10, 20 years, I'm totally different, and I think about things different. I've learned a lot, and so you can improve, and don't get caught a little sideways on that. All right, pattern values. So here's another thing I think when you think on authenticity in companies. A lot of companies, it seems like they get in the boardroom and these are our values. They get in the boardroom and they're like, hey, what do we hope to become someday? And then they build all these values and then they roll them out to the company, and the company's like, oh, but we aren't really that. Well, we can be, and then everyone's like, okay, let's try to become that. A pattern where it's like, okay, what are we? What do we think we are? Well, mostly, number one, we're probably like these data nerdy guys. Let's just say it, and go with it from there. And then team of doers, and there's our list. But I would say if you can start embracing just this very authentic way of looking at the world, and oftentimes you have to go against the grain a little bit, that both in your personal life and just company-wise, you'll be far more successful. And I have a couple weird call-outs here. Is Jesse here? Silva, Maddox? Did he come? He just left. All right, I wish he was here. Jesse, he has like tats down both of his arms all the way. He's doing business in Utah, right? He is definitely this guy that is a bit against the grain. And he will just tell you exactly what he thinks. So if you're doing an investment with a company like that, you can feel you may not like it, and if you don't like it, then you just go somewhere else. It's super easy. But like, as long as you're that individual that owns, where you are in the world and says things that you think, then everyone can sort of trust you. Even if, now, and there's nothing wrong if companies like, hey, I don't think that would be the type of person I would want to work with, then that's easy. You just go work with someone else. The ones that drive you crazy are the ones you're like, I'm not sure if I'm getting the story or not, and I have to go figure this thing out. There's another, is Taylor here from Applause? There's our Applause guys. So I've been working with these guys for quite a while. If you're looking for a company that is, now I'm not, here's the truth, I'm not inside the company, but from what I can tell, super authentic place. Just getting started, and of course, I've got a plug pattern. We're also just that same, I think, general culture. And if you look at a lot of the results of these companies, it just seems to work. So anyway, one other company, of course, that is my co-presenter here, he's going to blow your mind a little bit with the level of authenticity I think is somewhat unprecedented that you're going to hear today, is Johnny.
I don't know if you guys saw that first slide and looked at it closely, but those metrics that Pattern has are unbelievable. $1 billion in revenue. Absolutely amazing. And you can tell Dave is an authentic leader. Like, really appreciated your presentation. Thank you, Dave. Some of you may remember the hit song, Ironic by Alanis Morissette. It turned out to be her most successful record, and it could be heard almost nonstop on this old thing we used to call a radio. However, with respect to Miss Morissette, the only thing ironic about Ironic was that none of her lyrics were actually ironic. Rain on your wedding day isn't ironic. It is inconvenient. A black fly in your Chardonnay isn't ironic. It's just gross. I can, however, tell you what is truly ironic. And that is a CEO standing on the stage of this Silicon Slopes conference, giving a speech about building authentic company culture just 6 hours after laying off amazing employees. Now, some of you might be thinking that isn't ironic, that's hypocritical. Perhaps. And I did consider canceling my presentation today, but I'm not too proud to say that in addition to these wonderful people, just hours ago, I also stepped down as the CEO of Homey. This is a completely different presentation than what I had planned to give with Dave when he asked me 3 months ago. So I asked your forgiveness with my notes. This is hot off the press here. I'm not going to tell you that I'm not sad. Today was an incredibly difficult day. However, the decision to step down was not actually difficult to make. After all, it's the only way I could authentically keep our cherished company values and culture. I want to take you back to 2003. I had co-founded Entrada and was serving as its president. While working the insane hours of a tech startup founder wasn't a lot of fun, it was exhilarating. We were consistently growing in Utah and Idaho, and we had revenue to back it up. We were featured on the cover of Fortune's Small Business magazine, and all signs were pointing to our success. And at that time, a massive client came our way and asked for a very specific feature. Now, we didn't have that feature yet, but her account would be worth nearly 30 times what our biggest client was worth. And I promised her we could deliver, and she needed it in 90 days. That was the timeline. Then I made a massive mistake. With just weeks before the feature was due, I fired off a terse email to my partner, and it read, "Are we going to keep stringing this lady along, or are we going to actually build this tool?" The problem was when I hit send, I realized I sent it not to my partner, but to that client. Needless to say, she was furious and with every right to be. It occurred to me in that moment that all I had cared about was value, or in this case, money, when what I needed to actually care about was values. And from that point on, I dedicated myself and our organization to a set of core values. 12 years later, I co-founded Homie. And so many people were saying that we were crazy to found Homie. After all, we were trying to disrupt one of the most fiercely protective industries in America. Within a few months, we began receiving cease and desist letters. We also had investigators from the Division of Real Estate scaring away clients and home builder partners. Competing realtors used faked reviews to take our online ratings from a 4.6 star to a 2.2 star. And our own association was conducting continuing education courses, bashing our company with our own realtors present for that very course. I was even threatened with 6 months of jail time for having attorneys as the primary real estate representative. And we now have licensed agents. These kind of attacks were brutal for my morale. Each hurdle had me questioning what success would look like. However, because we had established our core values and shaped our company culture around these core values, we began to thrive. And although we literally had 20,000 plus competitors in each one of our target markets, and we were slandered continuously by our existing trade association, and we had to jump through endless number of hoops, we've consistently been able to meet our mission of bringing equity and change to real estate for good. You can see the mission being fulfilled as we've become the largest listing brokerage in the state of Utah, and we've helped our customers keep over $140 million in the process. Now, while you look at our technology, marketing, or other innovations, what's really been the driving force and success behind our organization is our core values. These core values are disruption, loyalty, humility, and balance. Disruption, we start with why. We bring power to our colleagues and customers. We don't believe you need permission to be a leader. Loyalty, our colleagues come first. By doing so, we're able to obsess over producing value for our customers. In humility, we check our ego at the door. We value progress over perfection. We believe in being grateful. In balance, our work is part of life, but it isn't life itself. We give our full effort at work and at home. We didn't focus on getting things done. We focused on getting the right things done. So with everything sounding so positive, why did I have to lay off people this morning and make the choice to step down as CEO, eliminating my salary and take an unpaid position on the board? Well, even though we've had success and even though we've held tightly to our core values, we've been facing some intense headwinds. As you know, after a lengthy bull real estate market, the bear has come out of hibernation. Not only do we still face the onslaught of resistance from what some may call the real estate cartel, backed by a trade organization that is twice the size of any other in the U.S., but the real estate market itself has been thrown into turmoil. Interest rates are nearly triple what they were in recent years. Add that to the beginning of a recession and you've got an uphill battle. That doesn't mean I don't feel up to the challenge. In fact, I feel more confident in our mission than I ever have before. Still, I made a commitment to follow our core values, and the only way I could do that was to hand over the reins to the new CEO and my co-founder, Mike Peregrina. So why? Why did I do that? If we're going to continue our vision of disrupting the real estate industry, we also need to disrupt the status quo at Homie, and Mike is the right person to do so. If I'm going to claim this core value of loyalty that I just read to you, I have to be loyal to as many homies as possible, and that means eliminating my salary so we can retain as much top talent as possible. It isn't easy to step away. It's not easy to acknowledge the organization needs new leadership, and it's not easy to stand on the stage and give you this message. However, you can't claim to live the value of humility if you're never willing to sacrifice your own position even when it's better for the team. Let me be clear, this isn't a happy day for me. I didn't wake up excited to step away from homie, and I would have done anything to keep from doing more layoffs. In the end, however, the path was clear. And it was made clear by asking two simple questions. First, am I leading according to our core values? And second, do the core values point to the need for new direction? The answers weren't fun, but they were clear. And in reality, the core values made the decision for me. Many of you in this room are just starting your companies. Many of you are in new leadership positions at established companies. Some of you are going to be entrepreneurs soon. We all want to think we're in control of everything at all times. But all of us instinctively know that that's not always true. It wasn't true at Entrada. It wasn't true at Homie, and it's definitely not true today. We know a recession is looming, and none of us can guarantee our companies will be untouched by an economic downturn. It's incredibly difficult to control our forecasts and projections. You can't control whether or not Facebook or Google will change their algorithms or change their pricing, which could have an immediate impact on our cost to acquire clients. You can't control new or changing regulations. You can't control a virus, a conflict, or a personal struggle. There is so much we cannot control. But what you can control and influence is your company culture. You can create a strategy of value that shapes your work environment. You can demonstrate vulnerability, giving people the green light to be authentic. In fact, it isn't that you can, it's that you must. As leaders, we accept the title and paycheck, and we also accept the responsibility and accountability. We have a moral obligation to create and adhere to the values for ourselves, our colleagues, our organization, and our customers. If you don't have core values, start your first draft this weekend. Get your team together and fine-tune them to be authentic and aligned. If you already have core values, spend the weekend truly pondering whether your values are aligned and authentic. If they are, lean in. If they aren't, begin immediately to change your core values from cute talking points and transform them into the most powerful forces driving your company. In closing, I'm grateful for my time as CEO and for having co-founders that were willing to lead companies with a strategy on culture. I'm leaving Homie's day-to-day operations in Mike Peregrina's capable hands. And we'll continue to change real estate for good. There's more work to do, and we won't quit until it's done. There's one message I hope all of you will embrace: that growth of character is greater than the growth of business. That living a life of values is greater than monetary value. And building an organization that focuses on vulnerable authenticity will allow everyone to come as they are, human and broken, and leave with personal success to take on any endeavor. Thank you.
Guys, does it get more authentic and real than that?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Johnny moved us all today because he's just sticking to his values. And he's doing what needs to be done, and it's hard stuff. And somebody who has a value of loyalty and decides to lay his own job off to be loyal to his employee base, I mean, how can you not list your house on Homie? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.